Normandy, France, June 12, 1944. My name is Thomas Brennan, and I'm writing this from a half-destroyed farmhouse somewhere in the French countryside. The smell of smoke and wet earth clings to everything here. It's been 6 days since we stormed Omaha Beach, and I still can't get the sound of the water out of my head, the way it churned red, the way bodies floated like broken toys. I'm 23 years old. I'm from Cedar Rapids, Iowa. I used to work at my father's hardware store, and the biggest decision I'd make on any given day was whether to order more nails or more screws. Now I make decisions about who lives and who dies, and I don't sleep much anymore. Today, Sergeant Davies sent me and another private, kid named Jimmy Carlson from somewhere in New Jersey, to scout an abandoned house about half a mile east of our position. Intelligence said it might have been used by German officers as a temporary command post. "Stay sharp, Brennan," Davies told me, his jaw tight. "Germans might have left surprises. Booby traps, mines. You know the drill." I nodded. Jimmy looked pale, but he always looked pale. The house was a 2-story stone building with half its roof blown off. The front door hung on one hinge, creaking in the wind. Inside, the air was thick with dust and the acrid smell of cordite. Furniture was overturned, papers scattered across the floor, maps, orders, things I couldn't read because they were in German. "Jesus," Jimmy whispered, his rifle pointed at shadows. "Place gives me the creeps." "Stay focused," I said, though my own hands were shaking. We moved through the main floor, carefully. Nothing. No traps, no soldiers, no bodies. Just the hollow silence of abandonment. Upstairs, we found what looked like an officer's quarters, a bed with a Wehrmacht uniform draped over it, a desk with more papers, a photograph of a blonde woman and 2 children. That's when I saw it. Tucked between the desk and the wall, partially hidden by fallen plaster, was a small leather notebook. Brown, worn at the edges, about the size of my hand. I picked it up carefully, half expecting it to explode, but it was just a book. A diary. "What you got there?" Jimmy asked, coming closer. "A notebook," I said, flipping it open. The pages were filled with handwriting, neat, deliberate German script. Dates going back to 1942. Looks like someone's journal. Jimmy peered over my shoulder. "Can you read it?" "No. But maybe someone back at command can." I slipped it into my jacket pocket. Something about it felt important, though I couldn't say why. Maybe it was the care with which it had been written, the way each page was filled margin to margin. Someone had poured their thoughts into this. "Come on," I said. "Let's report back." June 13th, 1944. I should have turned the notebook in immediately. That's protocol. But I didn't. Instead, I kept it in my pack, and that night, by the light of a dying fire, I asked Corporal Fisher, a German immigrant from Wisconsin who joined up to prove his loyalty, to translate a few pages for me. Fisher was a quiet guy, mid-30s, with wireframe glasses and a scar on his left hand. He took the notebook reluctantly. "Where'd you get this?" he asked. "Found it in that house Davies sent us to." He opened it, squinting at the first page in the firelight. His expression changed, surprise, then something darker. "What is it?" I asked. "It's a diary," Fisher said slowly. "Belongs to a man named Klaus Richter. Oberleutnant, first lieutenant. He's writing about..." He paused, reading silently. "About the war. About his doubts." "Doubts?" Fisher nodded, his eyes scanning the page. He writes, June 4th, 1942. "Today we marched into another village. The orders were clear, but my hands would not stop shaking as I carried them out. How did I become this? How did any of us? A chill ran through me. This wasn't what I expected. Enemy soldiers were supposed to be monsters, faceless killers. But this sounded like a man. "Keep going," I said. Fisher turned the page. "My wife Anna writes to me about the children. She says they ask when I'm coming home. I do not know how to answer her. I do not know if the man who returns will be the same man who left. The photograph, the blonde woman and the children. This was his family. There's more," Fisher said quietly. "But Brennan, you sure you want to hear this? This man, he's the enemy." I stare at the notebook in his hands. "I need to know," I said. "Read it." June 15th, 1944. Over the next 2 days, Fisher translated more entries for me in stolen moments, between patrols, during watch, whenever we could find a quiet corner. The diary became an obsession. I couldn't explain why. Klaus Richter was 31 years old, a schoolteacher from Munich before the war. He'd been drafted in 1940. His early entries were optimistic, even patriotic. He believed in duty, in serving his country. But as the months turned into years, something shifted. Fisher read one entry from October 1942. We were ordered to clear the village of partisans. Partisans, that's what they called them. But I saw old men and boys, no older than 15. They had no weapons. Still, the orders were orders. Afterward, I stood in the square, and I realized I was standing in someone's blood. I vomited behind a burned-out building. No one saw. I made sure of that. Jimmy, who'd been listening nearby, looked sick. Why'd he keep writing this stuff down? Why not just forget? Maybe he couldn't, I said quietly. The diary wasn't just about the war. It was about Richter's unraveling. He wrote about letters from home that stopped coming. About rumors of camps, of things happening in the East that no one talked about openly. About orders that made him question everything he'd been taught to believe. And then, in March 1944, he wrote something that made my blood run cold. Fisher's voice was barely a whisper. I have made a decision. I cannot continue to be part of this. But to leave is death. To stay is to lose my soul. There is a third option, one I have been considering. If I am careful, if I plan correctly, I can pass information. I can help end this, even if it costs me everything. I stared at Fisher. He was going to turn. He was going to defect. Fisher closed the notebook carefully. Or he was already helping the Allies. This diary, Brennan, this could be valuable. Real valuable. You need to take this to command. What if they just file it away? What if no one ever reads it? That's not your decision to make, but it felt like it was. This man, Klaus Richter, had reached out across the war, across everything that separated us, and left his truth in a notebook. And I'd found it. That had to mean something. June 16th, 1944. This morning, I made my decision. I went to Captain Miller, our company commander, and showed him the diary. I explained where I'd found it, what Fisher had translated. Miller was a hard man, early 40s, with gray at his temples and eyes that had seen too much. He listened without interrupting, then took the notebook from my hands. "You should have brought this to me immediately, Corporal," he said. His tone wasn't angry, just tired. "I know, sir. I'm sorry." He studied the diary, flipping through pages he couldn't read. "Fisher can verify this translation?" "Yes, sir." "All right. I'll pass it up the chain. Intelligence will want to see this. If this Richter was feeding information to our side, there might be more out there. Other contacts, other defectors." He looked at me. "You did the right thing bringing this to me, even if you should have done it sooner. Sir, what do you think happened to him?" "Richter." Miller's expression softened, just for a moment. "If he was passing information and the Germans found out, he's dead, son. That's how it works." I nodded. I'd suspected as much. As I turned to leave, Miller called after me. "Brennan, you read this diary, and part of you saw him as human. That's natural. But don't forget, he still wore that uniform. He still followed orders, even the ones he wrote about regretting. War doesn't give us the luxury of clean consciences." "I understand, sir." But as I walked back to my tent, I wasn't sure I did. Normandy, France, June 20th, 1944. 4 days passed before I heard anything about the diary. For days of patrols through muddy hedgerows, a sniper fire that came from nowhere, a watching boys from towns I'd never heard of die in fields that weren't theirs. War doesn't pause for curiosity or conscience. But I couldn't stop thinking about Klaus Richter. At night, when exhaustion finally let me close my eyes, I'd see his handwriting, those neat, deliberate lines filling page after page. I think about his wife Anna, his children, the way he described standing in someone's blood and vomiting behind a building where no one could see. Jimmy noticed. We were digging a foxhole together. "Always deeper," Davy said, "always deeper," when he paused and looked at me. "You still thinking about that Nazi's diary?" he asked, his voice low. He wasn't. I stopped myself. "Yeah, I guess I am." "What?" "I mean, Fisher read some of it. Guy had regrets." "So what?" "Everyone's got regrets in a war." I drove my shovel into the earth. He tried to do something about it. He didn't just complain. He was passing information. Maybe. Or maybe that's what he wanted someone to think if they found his diary. Jimmy wiped sweat from his forehead. My uncle fought in the First War. He told me once, never trust anything the enemy leaves behind. That includes their thoughts, Tommy. He had a point. But something in those words felt genuine. Maybe I was being naive. Maybe that's exactly what gets you killed. June 21st, 1944. Captain Miller found me after morning formation. His face was unreadable, which usually meant something complicated was happening. Brennan, you're coming with me. Intelligence wants to talk to you. My stomach dropped. Sir, did I do something wrong? No. They want to ask you about where you found that diary. Details you might have missed in your report. We drove in a jeep to a commandeered chateau about 3 miles behind the front lines. It was surreal, bullet-scarred walls on the outside, but inside, officers moved through rooms with maps and radios like it was just another day at an office. They led me to a small study on the second floor. 2 men waited there. The first was a major, maybe 50, with sharp eyes and a Boston accent. The second was younger, a lieutenant with the bearing of someone who'd been educated somewhere expensive. He introduced himself as Lieutenant Peter Ashford, OSS, Office of Strategic Services. Intelligence. Corporal Brennan, Ashford said, gesturing to a chair. Thank you for coming. I've read your report about the diary. I'd like to go over some details. Yes, sir. The house where you found it, you're certain it was being used as a German command post? That's what Sergeant Davies said, sir. There were Wehrmacht maps, orders, German equipment, and the diary was hidden? I nodded. Between the desk and the wall. Could have fallen there by accident. Or maybe someone hid it on purpose. Ashford exchanged a glance with a major. We've had Corporal Fisher translate the entire diary. What we've found is significant. He opened a folder and pulled out typed pages, the translated diary entries. Klaus Richter was more than just a conflicted officer. According to his entries from late 1943 onward, he was actively feeding intelligence to French resistance contacts. Unit movements, supply routes, defensive positions. My heart started pounding. So he really was helping us. Yes. And his information was valuable. Some of it correlates with resistance reports we received months ago. Reports that helped plan certain operations, including preliminary reconnaissance for the invasion. Ashford leaned forward. But here's what concerns us. His last entry is dated June 2nd, 1944. 4 days before D-Day. What does it say? Ashford read from the translation. I have learned something that I must pass on, but my contact has not appeared at our usual meeting place for 3 days. I fear the worst. If this information does not reach the right people, many will die. I am writing it here in the hope that if something happens to me, someone will find these words and understand their importance. The defenses at Point du Hoc are more extensive than reported. Additional gun emplacements, hidden bunkers, reinforced positions. The bombardment plans are insufficient. I have drawn what I know in the back pages. May God forgive me for what I have done and for what I have failed to do. The room went silent. Point du Hoc, I said quietly. That was where the Rangers had assaulted the cliffs. I'd heard the stories, how brutal it had been, how many men they'd lost. The Rangers took heavy casualties, the major said, his voice flat. If we'd had this information before the assault. Ashford cut him off. What's done is done. But Richter's diagrams in the back of the diary show positions we didn't know about. Positions that are still there. He looked at me. Brennan, I need you to take me to that house. Tomorrow. I want to see if there's anything else. Documents, maps, anything Richter might have hidden. Of course, sir. One more thing. Ashford's expression hardened. What happened to Klaus Richter? The house was abandoned, you said. Any sign of what happened to the officer who was stationed there? No bodies, sir. Just the uniform on the bed and his personal effects. Then either he retreated with his unit or... Ashford didn't finish the sentence. He didn't have to. June 22nd, 1944. Lieutenant Ashford, myself, Fisher, and a squad of 8 infantrymen returned to the house at dawn. The Germans had pulled back another mile during the night, so the area was relatively secure, but we stayed alert. Always alert. The house looked different in daylight, smaller, more pathetic. War does that. It strips everything down to rubble and memory. This is it, I said, leading them inside. Ashford went straight to the upstairs office. He searched methodically, the desk drawers, the spaces between floorboards, behind loose stones in the wall. Fisher and I watched, not sure what to do. "Sir," Fisher said after a few minutes. "May I see the diary again?" The original. Ashford had brought it in a protective case. He handed it over carefully. Fisher sat on the floor, examining each page in the morning light coming through the broken roof. "There's something here," Fisher said suddenly. "Look." He held the diary up to the light. On one page, there were faint indentations, impressions from writing on a page that had been torn out. "He wrote something and removed it," Fisher said. "If we had a pencil, we could do a rubbing, maybe make out the words." Ashford pulled out a pencil from his jacket. Fisher carefully shaded over the indentations. Slowly, words appeared, fragments, partial sentences. "Coordinates, Sector 7B, ammo dump, 20 meters north of, if you find us." "Coordinates," Ashford said, his voice sharp with focus. "Brennan, give me the maps from downstairs." "Now," I ran. When I returned, Ashford spread the German tactical maps across the floor and started comparing them to the coordinates Fisher had recovered. "Here," he said, pointing to a location about 2 miles southeast. "Sector 7B." This was their designation for an area near the village of St. Mir-Eglise. He looked up at the squad leader. "Sergeant, we need to get a team to these coordinates. If there's an ammunition dump there, it's either been abandoned or it's still in enemy hands. Sir, we need authorization." "I'll get authorization." This could be critical. June 23rd, 1944. The next day, I wasn't supposed to be part of the reconnaissance team that went to investigate Richter's coordinates. But I asked Ashford if I could go, and surprisingly, he agreed. "You found the diary," he said. "You deserve to see this through." We moved out at 0400 hours, 12 of us, including Ashford, moving through the pre-dawn darkness. The countryside was quiet except for distant artillery. Always the distant artillery, like thunder that never stops. The coordinates led us to a dense grove of trees on the edge of a small farm. At first, we didn't see anything. Just trees, underbrush, the remains of a stone wall. Then one of the scouts found it, a camouflaged entrance, partially covered with branches and netting. A tunnel leading underground. "Jesus," someone whispered. We entered carefully, weapons ready, flashlights cutting through the darkness. The tunnel opened into a larger chamber, a bunker carved into the hillside. And inside, ammunition. Crates and crates of it. Artillery shells, rifle rounds, grenades, explosives. Enough to supply a battalion for weeks. "He was right," Ashford said, his voice echoing in the chamber. "Richter was right, but that's not all we found." In the corner of the bunker, half hidden behind stacked crates, was a body. A German officer in a Wehrmacht uniform, a single gunshot wound to the head. Execution style. Ashford approached carefully, then knelt beside the body. He checked the man's identification papers. When he stood, his face was pale. "Klaus Richter," he said quietly. "Oberleutnant Klaus Richter. Born 1913, Munich." The room went silent. I stared at the body, at the man whose words I'd read, whose thoughts I'd carried with me, whose struggle I'd witnessed through ink on paper. He'd been murdered. "They found out," Fisher said, his voice hollow. "The Germans found out he was passing information. They executed him and left him here." I couldn't look away from Richter's face. Even in death, he looked tired. Tired and sad. "Sir," one of the soldiers called from deeper in the bunker. "You need to see this." We followed him to a smaller alcove. There, carefully hidden beneath a loose stone, was a metal box. Inside were more papers, documents, maps, lists of German positions and troop movements, all meticulously documented in Richter's handwriting. And on top of everything, a letter. Unsealed. Written in English. Ashford picked it up and read aloud. "To whoever finds this, my name is Klaus Richter. I have done terrible things in service of a cause I no longer believe in. I cannot undo what I have done, but I can try to prevent more death, more suffering. The information in this box may help end this war sooner. I do not expect forgiveness, and I do not expect to be remembered as anything but what I was, a man who served evil, even if I tried, in the end, to resist it. But if these words reach someone who can use this information to save lives, then perhaps my death will have meaning. Tell my wife, if you can find her, that I thought of her and the children until the end. Tell her I'm sorry. No one spoke. What was there to say? June 24th, 1944. Back at camp, I sat alone with the diary one last time before Ashford took it permanently to headquarters. He'd given me permission to hold it to say goodbye to it, I suppose. I opened to a random page. March 1943. Richter wrote, I watched a bird today, a small brown sparrow, land on the barrel of a destroyed tank. It sang for a moment, then flew away. I envied it. To be so small, so insignificant, that war passes beneath you and you remain untouched. We are not birds. We are men, and men build the wars that destroy them. I closed the diary carefully. Captain Miller found me an hour later. Heard you found the ammo dump. Good work, Corporal. Thank you, sir. He sat down beside me on the ammunition crate I was using as a bench. Ashford told me about Richter. Said you took it hard. I didn't know him, sir. But I feel like I did. That's the danger of reading a man's private thoughts. You start seeing him as human. Miller pulled out a cigarette, offered me one. I don't smoke, but I took it anyway. Here's what I've learned in 2 wars, Brennan. The enemy is human. Every single one of them. They have families, doubts, dreams. They laugh, they cry, they shit themselves when the shells start falling, just like us. He lit both our cigarettes. But that doesn't change what we have to do. We still have to fight. We still have to kill them, and they still have to kill us until one side wins. That's war. It's not clean, it's not fair, and knowing the enemy's humanity doesn't make it any easier. Sometimes it makes it harder. Then why do it? I asked. Why keep fighting if we know they're just like us? Miller looked at me with those tired eyes. Because some causes are worth dying for. And some causes, like the one they're fighting for, are worth stopping, no matter the cost. Richter figured that out. That's why he did what he did. He stood up, stubbed out his cigarette. You did good finding that diary, Brennan. Real good. Intelligence says the information in that bunker could save a lot of lives. Remember that. Normandy, France, July 8, 1944. The war continued. It always continued. 3 weeks after finding Klaus Richter's body in that bunker, we pushed deeper into France. Hedgerow by hedgerow, village by village, bodies piling up on both sides like firewood. The diary became classified material, locked away in some intelligence archive, but I carried copies of Fisher's translations with me. Ashford had given them to me before he left for another assignment. You should have these, he'd said. You're the one who found him. You're the one who understood what he was trying to do. I kept them in a waterproof pouch next to my letters from home. Jimmy died on July 3rd, sniper bullet clean through the neck. He was telling me a joke about a priest and a farmer when it happened. He never finished the punchline. I still don't know how it ends. Fisher made it through July, but caught shrapnel in his leg during an artillery barrage on August 12th. They sent him to a field hospital in England. I never saw him again. Davies bought it outside of St. Lo. Captain Miller made it all the way to Germany before a landmine took his legs. Last I heard, he was in a VA hospital in Virginia, teaching younger officers about infantry tactics. I survived. I don't know why. Luck, maybe. Or maybe God has a cruel sense of humor. But Richter's words stayed with me through all of it. When I was terrified, when I was angry, when I wanted to hate every German soldier I saw, I'd remember his diary. I'd remember that somewhere on the other side of the guns, there were men who were just as scared, just as conflicted, just as human as I was. It didn't make killing them easier. If anything, it made it harder. Paris, France, August 29, 1944. Paris was liberated on August 25th. By the 29th, I had a 3-day pass and a name, Anna Richter. Lieutenant Ashford had tracked her down through Red Cross channels. She'd fled Munich with her children in early 1944, before the heaviest bombing raids began. She'd made it to Paris somehow, was living in a small apartment in the 15th arrondissement with her 2 daughters, Greta, age 9, and Sophie, age 6. I didn't have to go see her. No one ordered me. But I couldn't stop thinking about Richter's final letter. Tell my wife, if you can find her, that I thought of her and the children until the end. Tell her I'm sorry. I owed him that much. The apartment building was on a narrow street near a bakery. The smell of fresh bread, the first real bread I'd smelled in months, almost made me cry. I climbed 3 flights of stairs and knocked on a blue door with peeling paint. A woman answered. Mid-30s, blonde hair tied back, thin from hunger, but still beautiful in a tired, worn way. Her eyes were the color of storm clouds. Yes, she said in French. Her accent was thick, German underneath. Mrs. Richter. Anna Richter. I said in English. Her face went pale. Who are you? My name is Thomas Brennan. I'm with the United States Army. I didn't know how to say it. May I come in? I have something to tell you. About your husband. She stared at me for a long moment, and I saw her hands trembling. Then she stepped aside. The apartment was small. 1 main room with a kitchen area, a bedroom I could glimpse through a half-open door. 2 little girls sat at a small table, drawing with pencil stubs on scraps of paper. They looked up at me with wide eyes. Greta, Sophie, go to the bedroom, Anna said in German. The girls obeyed immediately, gathering their drawings. When they were gone, Anna sat down heavily in a wooden chair. He is dead, she said. It wasn't a question. Yes, ma'am. I'm sorry. She closed her eyes. 1 tear ran down her cheek, then another. How? He was executed by his own command. They discovered he was passing information to the resistance. She opened her eyes, looked at me with something between horror and pride. He did it, then. He really did it. He said in his last letter that he was going to, but I thought. She shook her head. I hoped he would just desert, run away, come find us. But Klaus was not that kind of man. He had to try to make it right. I pulled out the translated pages from my pouch and the diary itself. I'd asked Ashford if I could bring them. He bent the rules and let me. He kept a diary, I said, placing them on the table between us. I found it. It helped us help the Allies. The information he provided saved lives. A lot of lives. Anna picked up the diary with shaking hands, opened it to a random page. Even though it was in German, her eyes filled with fresh tears. This is his handwriting, she whispered. His thoughts. I thought I would never see anything of him again. He wrote you a final letter, I said. It was hidden with military documents in a bunker. He wanted you to know he was thinking of you and the girls until the end. He wanted you to know he was sorry. Sorry, she repeated, her voice breaking. Always sorry. Klaus was always apologizing for the war, for leaving us, for what he had to do, for what he couldn't do. She looked at me, and her storm cloud eyes were fierce now. But he should not be sorry. He was braver than anyone. He stood up when everyone else bowed down. He died trying to stop the evil he was forced to serve. I didn't know what to say to that, so I just nodded. Why did you come here? She asked. You did not have to. You could have sent a letter or said nothing at all. I read his diary, I said. Not all of it, I can't read German. But enough. And I felt like I knew him. Like I owed him something. He saved lives with what he did, including maybe mine. Anna wiped her eyes with the back of her hand. What will happen to us now? We are Germans in Paris. There is not much love for us here. I can help with that, I said. I know people, officers who can make sure you're registered properly with the Red Cross, that you get rations, that you're treated fairly. And I can make sure everyone knows that your husband was a hero, that he fought against the Nazis in his own way. A hero, she said quietly, testing the word. Yes, he was. Even if no one else ever knows it, he was. Normandy, France, September 15th, 1944. I went back to the house one last time before my unit moved east toward Germany. It was different now. Allied engineers had cleared the area, and French families were starting to return to their bombed-out homes, trying to rebuild. The house where I'd found the diary had partially collapsed. More of the roof had fallen in, and the walls were crumbling. I climbed the stairs carefully and stood in what remained of Richter's room. Someone had taken the furniture, the maps, everything useful. All that was left was rubble and memories. I thought about the first time I'd stood here, nervous and young, searching for enemy documents. I found something else instead, proof that even in the worst circumstances, people can choose to resist, to do what's right even when the cost is everything. I pulled out a piece of paper and a pencil. I don't know why. Maybe I just needed to leave something behind, some record that Klaus Richter had existed, that his choice mattered. I wrote, "Here lived a man named Klaus Richter. He was a German officer, a husband, a father, a teacher. He did terrible things, and he regretted them. When he could no longer live with what he was doing, he chose to resist. He passed information to the Allies. He saved lives. He died for it. His name should be remembered." Thomas Brennan, U.S. Army, September 15, 1944. I folded the paper and tucked it into a crack in the stone wall, then covered it with loose mortar. Maybe someone would find it someday. Maybe not. But it was there, a small monument to a complicated man who tried to do the right thing when the world had gone mad. Cedar Rapids, Iowa, May 10, 1945. The war in Europe ended on May 8, 1945. V-Day. Victory in Europe. I was back in Cedar Rapids by then, discharged after taking shrapnel to my shoulder in February during the Hurtgen Forest. The wound wasn't serious enough to kill me, but it was serious enough to send me home. Lucky again. My father's hardware store looked exactly the same as when I'd left. The bell over the door still chimed. The smell of wood and oil still hung in the air. My father looked older, grayer, but his handshake was still firm. "Welcome home, son," he said. Home. The word felt foreign. I tried to slip back into my old life. I worked the counter, ordered inventory, made small talk with customers about nails and screws, but everything felt distant, like I was watching someone else live my life. At night, I dreamed about hedgerows and artillery. I dreamed about Jimmy never finishing his joke. I dreamed about Klaus Richter's body in that bunker, executed for doing what was right. I started writing, not for publication, just for myself. I wrote down everything I could remember about the diary, about Richter, about what his words had meant to me. I wrote about the war, about the men I'd known, about the things we'd done. One night, my father found me at the kitchen table at 2 in the morning, surrounded by pages of handwriting. "Can't sleep?" he asked. "Not much, no." He sat down across from me, poured himself a glass of water. "Want to talk about it?" I told him everything. About the diary, about Richter, about Anna and the children. About how I couldn't reconcile the enemy I'd been taught to hate with the man whose thoughts I'd read, whose final wish I'd carried out. My father listened without interrupting. When I finished, he was quiet for a long time. "You know what I think," he finally said. "I think you were given a gift. Not a pleasant one, but a gift nonetheless. You were given the chance to see the truth, that war isn't about good guys and bad guys. It's about people making impossible choices in terrible circumstances. Some choose wrong, some choose right. Most do some of both. What am I supposed to do with that?" I asked. "Live with it. Remember it. Make sure other people understand it. That's all any of us can do." Cedar Rapids, Iowa, November 11, 1946. 18 months after the war ended, I received a letter from Paris. The return address was Anna Richter's. My hand shook as I opened it. "Dear Thomas, I apologize for taking so long to write. Life has been difficult, but we are managing. The girls and I have been sponsored by Catholic Charity, and we have found work. Greta helps me clean houses, and Sophie attends school. She is bright, like her father. I wanted you to know that I have had Klaus's diary translated fully into French, and I have made copies. One I keep for the girls so they can know who their father truly was. Another I have given to the French Resistance Historical Society, so his contribution to the cause of freedom can be recorded. But there is a third copy, and it is for you. You found Klaus's words. You ensured they were not lost. You came to find me when you did not have to. You honored him when the world wanted to forget him. Enclosed is the translation. I hope it brings you some measure of peace, as writing this letter has brought me some measure of closure. Thank you for remembering Klaus. Thank you for seeing him as human. In a world that tried to strip away humanity, that means everything. With gratitude, Anna Richter." The package contained a bound typescript, the complete diary, translated into English. 3 years of thoughts, fears, doubts, and ultimately, defiance. I read it cover to cover that night. The early entries were harder to read than I'd expected. Richter had believed at first. He'd written about pride in serving Germany, about duty and honor. He described battles with a soldier's clinical detachment. But slowly, page by page, the doubt crept in. The things he witnessed, the orders he followed, the things he couldn't forget, no matter how hard he tried. By 1943, he was documenting atrocities, not in explicit detail, but in haunted fragments. Villages cleared, civilians shot, orders that made him question everything. And then, the decision to resist. The careful documentation of information. The meetings with resistance contacts. The knowledge that if he was caught, death would be certain. His final entry, written the day before he was executed, was the hardest to read. June 2nd, 1944. If anyone ever reads this, know that I was afraid. I am still afraid as I write these words. But fear is not an excuse for inaction. I have made my choices, and I will face the consequences. I think of Anna, of Greta and Sophie. I pray they will be safe, that this war will end, that they will know I try to be better than I was. I do not ask for forgiveness. I do not deserve it. But perhaps my death will have meaning. Perhaps these words, this information, will help end the madness. That is all I can hope for now. I closed the diary and sat in the darkness of my room. Klaus Richter wasn't a saint. He'd done terrible things, he admitted as much. He'd followed orders he knew were wrong. He'd been complicit in evil. But he'd also made the choice to resist when he could no longer live with himself. He'd risked everything, and ultimately given everything, to try to make amends. In a world of easy heroes and clear villains, he was something more complicated. Something more human. And somehow that made his sacrifice more meaningful, not less. Cedar Rapids, Iowa, June 6, 1964. 20 years after D-Day, I was 43 years old. I'd married a woman named Elizabeth, a nurse from Iowa City. We had 2 children, a boy named James after Jimmy Carlson, and a girl named Grace. I ran my father's hardware store now. He'd retired, though he still came in most days to make sure I wasn't screwing it up. Life was good. Quite normal. But I never forgot the diary. Every year on June 6, D-Day, I took out Klaus Richter's translated diary and read a few pages. It was my ritual, my way of remembering. This year, my son James, now 15, found me reading it in my study. "What's that, Dad?" he asked. I hesitated. Then I told him. Not everything, he was still too young for everything, but the essential story. The diary. The German officer. The choice he made. The price he paid. James listened intently. When I finished, he asked, "Was he a good guy or a bad guy?" I smiled sadly. "That's the question, isn't it? I think he was a man. Just a man. He did bad things, and then he tried to do good things. The world wants to divide everyone into heroes and villains, but most people are somewhere in between." "What happened to his family?" James asked. "Last I heard, they were still in Paris. The daughters would be grown now. Maybe with families of their own." James thought about that. "You should find them," he said. "You should let them know you still remember." Out of the mouths of children. Paris, France, August 15th, 1964. I took my first trip back to Europe that summer. Elizabeth thought I was crazy. Why would you want to go back there? But she understood. She always understood. I found Anna Richter in a small apartment in Montmartre. She was older now, 53, with gray streaking her blonde hair. But her storm cloud eyes were the same. She opened the door, looked at me for a long moment, then smiled with recognition. "Thomas Brennan," she said. "After all these years, Mrs. Richter. I hope this isn't an imposition. Not at all. Please come in." Her apartment was filled with light now, with flowers and vases and photographs on walls. I saw pictures of 2 young women, Greta and Sophie, grown up beautiful. They are both married now, Anna said, seeing where I was looking. Greta is a teacher, like her father. Sophie is a nurse. They both have children. Klaus would have been so proud. "Do they know?" I asked. "About their father?" "Yes." I told them everything when they were old enough to understand. I showed them the diary, the translations. I wanted them to know that their father was complicated, but that he was brave, that he chose to do right even when it cost him everything. She made tea, and we sat in her small kitchen, and we talked about the war, about the years since, about loss and survival, and the strange ways life continues. "Why did you come back?" she asked finally. "My son asked me to," I said. "He wanted me to tell you that we still remember. That Klaus's choice still matters." Anna's eyes filled with tears. "Thank you. Thank you for that." Before I left, she gave me something, a small photograph of Klaus Richter in civilian clothes, standing with Anna and the girls. They were smiling. It was taken before the war, before everything fell apart. "Keep this," she said. "Remember him like this. Not as a soldier, not as a martyr. Just as a man who loved his family and tried his best to do what was right." I still have that photograph. It sits on my desk in my study, next to the diary. Cedar Rapids, Iowa, present day. I'm 73 years old now. My children are grown, with children of their own. Elizabeth passed 2 years ago, cancer. I miss her every day. The world has changed. The war that defined my youth is now ancient history to most people. D-Day is something in textbooks. The men I served with are mostly gone, but I still have the diary. I've thought about donating it to a museum, to a historical archive. It belongs there, really. It's an important document, proof that resistance existed even in the heart of the enemy. But I can't quite let it go. It's become part of me, this record of a man who struggled with conscience, who chose resistance over complicity, who died hoping his death would mean something. Last week, my grandson, James's son, also named Thomas, asked me about the war. He's studying World War II in school. "Grandpa," he said, "were the Germans all bad?" I pulled out the diary. I showed him the photograph, and I told him the story of Klaus Richter. "No," I said, "they weren't all bad. Most were just people scared and confused, following orders because that's what people do. But some, like the man who wrote this, found the courage to resist, to say no, to choose humanity over obedience." "What happened to him?" young Thomas asked. "He died for it. He knew he probably would, and he did it anyway." My grandson held the photograph carefully. "He looks like a normal person. That's because he was. That's the point. Evil doesn't announce itself with horns and pitchforks. It wears a uniform. It speaks of duty and patriotism. It makes ordinary people do extraordinary evil. But goodness, real goodness, that also comes from ordinary people. People who choose to resist even when resistance seems impossible." Young Thomas thought about that. "Is that why you keep this diary?" "To remember that." "Yes," I said. "That's exactly why. I found a hidden notebook in a destroyed house in Normandy 80 years ago. Inside were the thoughts of an enemy soldier, a man I never met, never spoke to, never knew except through his written words. That notebook changed me. It taught me that enemies are human, that evil is banal, that resistance is possible even in the darkest circumstances, that choices matter even when, especially when, they cost us everything. Klaus Richter wasn't a hero in the traditional sense. He participated in terrible things. He wore the uniform of an evil regime. For years, he followed orders he knew were wrong. But in the end, he chose to resist. He chose to fight back in the only way he could, by gathering information, by helping the Allies, by doing whatever small thing might help end the war sooner. He died for that choice, executed by his own command, left in an abandoned bunker, nearly forgotten. But not quite forgotten. Because I found his diary. Because I read his words. Because I carried his message to his family. Because I remembered. And now I've told his story. That's all any of us can ask for, really. To be remembered not for our worst moments, but for the times we tried to do better. To be seen not as monsters or saints, but as complicated humans who struggled and failed and sometimes, just sometimes, found the courage to do what was right. I found a hidden notebook, and it exposed everything. About war, about humanity, about the choices we make when the world forces us to choose. And I will carry those lessons until the day I die.